Tell me something, Keanu. Diana Cross leaned forward in her chair, her voice slicing through the warm studio air like a blade through silk. Is the silence a choice, or is there simply nothing going on inside that head of yours? The studio audience of 340 people stopped breathing at the exact same moment. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Not the soft crinkle of a program being folded in restless hands. 340 people, the brightest studio lights in American primetime television burning above them, and the room went so still it felt like the whole building had been pressed beneath glass. Diana Cross sat exactly as she always sat, spine straight, both elbows resting on the arms of her chair, her hands folded in a way that looked casual and was anything but. She had done this for 14 years. She had sat in that chair and dismantled senators, sobered up Oscar winners, and made the most powerful people in American public life squirm inside their tailored suits. She was not nervous. She was never nervous. She had asked that question the way a surgeon makes the first cut, certain, clean, and completely without hesitation. Keanu Reeves did not move. He sat across from her in the guest chair, black jacket, dark eyes, both hands resting open on his knees, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided not to fight. There was no flash of anger in his face. No tightening around the jaw. No quick blink of someone buying time. Just stillness. Complete and unreadable stillness. And his right hand rested, lightly, barely, near the inside pocket of his jacket. Near something folded. Near something he had been carrying for exactly 16 minutes. The camera operator on the far side of the stage forgot to adjust his lens. A woman in the third row pressed her hand slowly to her mouth. Something was happening here that had nothing to do with a normal interview. Nobody in that room could name it yet. But they all felt it, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. Then Keanu Reeves opened his mouth. And what he said was not a defense. It was not an attack. It was 7 words, quiet, steady, and aimed with the precision of someone who already knew exactly where they were going to land. But to understand why those 7 words stopped every clock in that studio, you first have to know what was written on the paper inside his pocket. And what happened in the hallway 16 minutes before he ever walked onto that stage. If you've never heard this story, stay with me. Because this is the one nobody who was in that room has ever forgotten. Subscribe so you don't miss a single second of what comes next. That night didn't begin on stage. It began in a hallway 30 feet from the studio floor, at exactly 7:14 in the evening, on the 14th of October, 1999, at Stage 6 of Burbank Studios, Los Angeles. Diana Cross was already in her blazer. It was the blue one, the same deep navy blazer she had worn the night she made a sitting United States Senator cry on live television in the spring of 1996. She wore it the way soldiers wear medals, not for decoration but for memory. For the reminder of what she was capable of when she sat down across from someone and decided to find out exactly how much pressure a person could hold before they cracked. She had been doing this for 14 years. 14 years of the sharpest questions in American primetime. 14 years of guests who arrived confident and left exposed. 14 years of a reputation so precise and so feared that the show's publicist once received 17 phone calls in a single morning from Hollywood agents begging their clients off the booking. Not one of those calls was answered. Diana Cross had built every inch of that reputation herself. She had started at a local radio station in Cincinnati at 23 years old, talking into a microphone in a room the size of a closet, getting paid $60 a week, certain of exactly one thing, that she had something to say and that the world was eventually going to have to sit still and listen to her say it. 3 failed television pilots. 2 networks that told her she was too intense, too unsmiling, too unwilling to soften the edges. She did not soften the edges. She sharpened them. And then she won. But tonight, something in the air of Stage 6 was different. Her assistant, Sophie Vance, 24 years old, 5 months on the job, the kind of young woman who wrote everything down in a small green notebook she kept in her left jacket pocket, had been crying since 4 in the afternoon. She had covered it carefully with concealer and a very still expression. Diana had noticed at 4:18. Neither of them had said a single word about it since. The floor director called 5 minutes to air. Diana straightened her blazer, set her jaw, and walked toward the light. She had no idea that the man waiting in the guest chair already knew her secret. Keanu already knows. But how? And what does he know? By October of 1999, Keanu Reeves was the most talked about actor on the planet. The Matrix had opened 7 months earlier and rewrote the language of cinema. Critics called it revolutionary. Audiences watched it twice, 3 times, 4. Sequels were already being counted. Keanu's face appeared on magazine covers in countries he had never visited. By every external measure, He stood at the absolute peak of everything a Hollywood career is supposed to deliver. And he was carrying a grief so heavy it had changed the way he breathed. In August of 1999, his daughter, Ava Archer Syme Reeves, was born still. He and his girlfriend Jennifer Syme had gone to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with every reason to believe the world was about to get larger. It got smaller instead. He buried his daughter. He held himself together the way people do when they have no choice, carefully, quietly, 1 hour at a time. Then he went back to work. Not because it healed him, but because stillness, for a man who processed grief by moving through it, was the one thing he could not survive. Nobody on the circuit knew this version of him. What cameras caught was the movie star, composed, thoughtful, famously gentle. What they missed was the man who rode the subway between obligations because he liked being near ordinary people moving through ordinary days. The man who learned every crew member's name on every set he worked. He did not do these things to be seen. He simply had no other way of being. Sophie Vance had heard about the loss through a crew member 2 days before the taping. A quiet mention between setups, the kind of sentence spoken low when someone wants another person to understand without having to explain everything. Sophie went to her car at lunch. She took out her small green notebook, tore a page from the back and wrote 2 sentences. Just 2. The name of a hospital. And 3 words that would make everything that followed possible. She found him in the green room at 6:58. She pressed the folded paper into his hand without a word. Her hands were not quite steady. "You read it?" He looked at her. He nodded once, the way a person nods when they've been handed something they already know how to carry. He folded the note. He placed it in his inside jacket pocket. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then the floor director knocked and told him it was time. He walked out knowing exactly what Diana Cross was hiding behind that blue blazer, and exactly why tonight was not the night to let her fight alone. This story gets harder to breathe in from here. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment the room finally broke. He knows her secret. She doesn't know he knows. The lights are up. The cameras are rolling. And Diana Cross is about to make the worst mistake of her career. The first 2 minutes of the interview were warm. Diana Cross opened the way she always opened. Professionally, smoothly, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this so many times the beginning had become almost automatic. The Matrix. The sequel's already in development. Where did he see himself in 5 years? Standard ground. The audience settled into their seats. The floor director relaxed his shoulders. A segment producer behind camera 3 checked something off her clipboard. This was a normal interview. This was fine. It was not fine. Diana waited exactly 118 seconds. Then she pivoted. "Let's talk about what actually happened with the Matrix," she said, her voice dropping just slightly into a register that people who watched her show regularly recognized immediately. The audience recognized it too. A few of them sat up straighter. Because there's an argument, a compelling one, that any reasonably blank-faced actor could have carried that role. That it was the director's, the vision, the spectacle. Not the man in the leather coat. She tilted her head. "Do you think that's fair?" Strike 1. Dressed as a question. Designed to make him defensive, to force him into the uncomfortable position of either arguing for himself, which would look arrogant, or agreeing, which would look weak. It was a perfect trap. The audience held its breath. Keanu considered the question the way he considered everything, without hurry. Then he said that she was probably right. That the Wachowskis had built something that would have been extraordinary regardless of who stood at its center. That he had simply been grateful to be the person standing there. He said it without performance. Without deflection. He turned the attack into a tribute so naturally that the audience exhaled and Diana Cross, just barely, just for a fraction of a second, recalibrated. That was not the response she had prepared for. She moved to strike 2. This one was more personal. She leaned forward slightly and asked whether the stillness was real, the famous Keanu calm, the quietness that magazine profiles had turned into mythology, or whether it was simply a very well-maintained mask. Whether there was actually a person underneath the image, or whether Hollywood had manufactured a legend and the man inside it had simply learned to disappear. The question was constructed to make him either perform emotion to prove he had it, or stay still and prove her point. Another perfect trap. Keanu looked at her for a moment. Then he said something he had never said publicly before. Something true and unguarded about what it actually felt like to be a man the world had decided to project onto. How strange it was to be used as a surface for other people's ideas of what a person should be. He said it simply. Without drama. Without asking the audience to feel anything about it. And the room didn't laugh, didn't applaud. Just listened. Completely. The way people listen when someone is being honest in a space where honesty is rare. Diana Cross turned her pen over once in her fingers. Twice. Then she went for strike 3. This one was not dressed as anything. It did not arrive with the polite covering of a professional question or the thin disguise of journalistic curiosity. It arrived the way a final blow arrives, direct and aimed precisely where it would hurt the most. She referenced his absence from several public events in the months prior. She framed it as concern. She said his name gently, the way you say someone's name when you want them to believe you are on their side. And then she implied, not stated, implied in the careful language of someone who has done this for 14 years, that the silence, the withdrawal, the stillness, all of it pointed to something the public deserved to understand. The audience went cold. A cameraman on the far left of the stage stopped moving entirely. The floor director took one step forward from the wings. The woman in the third row, the one who had pressed her hand to her mouth in the first 2 minutes, did it again now but harder. Keanu Reeves said nothing for 4 full seconds. His right hand rested near his jacket pocket. He did not reach for the note. He looked at Diana Cross, not with anger, not with the wounded expression of someone who has just been struck, but with something far more unsettling. He looked at her with recognition. The way you look at someone when you understand exactly why they are doing what they are doing. When you know the thing they have not said. When you have been carrying their secret in your inside jacket pocket for the last 31 minutes. Then he leaned forward. And he asked her 7 words. 7 words. Leaning forward. Aim not to wound, aim to reach. And Diana Cross's face does something it has never done in 14 years of live television. When did you last sleep, Diana? That was it. 7 words. No raised voice. No pointed finger. No performance of any kind. Just 7 words delivered so quietly that the front 2 rows of the audience were not entirely certain they had heard them correctly. But the cameras had. And the microphones had. And Diana Cross had, because her body told the story her face was still trying to control. Her pen stopped moving. In 14 years of live television, Diana Cross had never once lost possession of a moment. She had held rooms together through technical failures, through hostile guests, through a live broadcast during which a fire alarm sounded for 11 full seconds and she simply waited it out and continued the sentence she had been in the middle of. She did not lose moments. Moments belonged to her. That was the whole architecture of who she was. But this moment did not belong to her. She opened her mouth. A response was there, she could feel the shape of it, the professional reflex, the pivot back toward control. And then something stopped it. Because the question had not come from nowhere. It had not come from research or rumor or the kind of calculated cruelty she herself sometimes deployed. It had come from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere genuine. And Diana Cross, who had spent 14 years in a chair designed specifically to detect the difference between performance and truth, recognized it immediately. She looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time since he had sat down across from her, she looked at Keanu Reeves not as a guest to be managed but as a person sitting 3 feet away who had just said something true to her in a room full of cameras. Her jaw was still set. Her hands were still folded. But something behind her eyes, some last locked door, went very, very quiet. How do you know? She said. 3 words. Barely above a whisper. Into a live microphone. In front of 340 people and every camera on the floor. And the audience understood, in the way audiences understand things they cannot quite articulate, that the interview they had come to watch was no longer the one happening in front of them. Keanu did not explain. He did not reach for the note. He did not make it a moment about himself. He simply rested his hand on the armrest between them and leaned in slightly, and said something meant only for her. Something the microphones caught but that no producer ever cleared for air. The floor director later said it was the longest 11 seconds of dead air in the show's 14-year history. What Diana Cross did next, live, in front of every camera, is the reason this night is still talked about. Subscribe. Stay for every word. 11 seconds of dead air. Something said that never aired. And Diana Cross is about to do the one thing nobody in that building ever expected. Diana Cross looked at her floor director and said 2 words. Give me a minute. In 19 years of television production, Marcus Webb had never once stopped a live taping for an unscheduled break. He had worked through a guest fainting, through a microphone that sparked and went dead mid-sentence, through a segment that ran 11 minutes over and required him to cut 3 commercial blocks in real time. He was not a man who stopped things. But he looked at Diana Cross's face in that moment, really looked at it, and he nodded. He called the break without a word of explanation. The floor went to commercial. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether what they had just watched was something they were allowed to talk about yet. Diana and Keanu walked off stage together. Not toward the green room. Toward the narrow hallway off stage 6. The one with the exposed pipes running along the ceiling and the black cable tape holding cords flat against the concrete floor. Sophie Vance watched them from the far end of the corridor. She did not follow. She would say later, in the only interview she ever gave about that night, that she couldn't hear a word of what was said. She said she watched Keanu Reeves stand in that hallway talking quietly to the sharpest woman in American television. And Diana Cross, the glass blade, the woman who had never once apologized for anything she had ever done on air, stood with her arms at her sides and her head slightly bowed. Like someone who had just been handed permission to put something down that had been too heavy for too long. They were in that hallway for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. When they walked back onto that stage, everything had changed. The audience felt it before either of them spoke a single word. They're back on stage. Something between them has shifted completely. And what happens in the final 12 minutes of that broadcast? Nobody in that room will ever forget. 8 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in June of 2000, Keanu Reeves walked into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center alone. No publicist. No photographer. No announcement of any kind. He asked for a room number at the front desk, walked down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and sat for 45 minutes with Diana Cross's daughter while Diana was across town at a mandatory network meeting she could not cancel. He left before Diana returned. On the bedside table he placed a single book. No inscription, no note, no name written anywhere inside it. Just the book. The nurses on that floor would talk about it quietly among themselves for years. Diana Cross wrote about that October interview once, in a short personal essay for a magazine she never named publicly. She did not use Keanu's name. She called him the man in the black jacket. She wrote that he had asked her one question and it was the first honest thing anyone had said to her in 3 months. She wrote that she had spent 14 years believing strength meant never being seen to crack. And that he had shown her, in 7 words and 4 minutes in a hallway, that the bravest thing she ever did was crack in front of someone who already knew why. He never spoke about that night publicly. Not once. He simply continued being exactly who he had always been, a man too quietly decent for the loud world that kept trying to define him. This story moved you, hit like. It takes 1 second and it finds more people who need it. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been shown grace by someone who had every reason to walk away?